Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Or as President Obama would say, you're welcome. We're glad you're in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, I was the governor of this great state for 8 years. I'm proud of my state. I love my state. It's filled with wonderful people. But let's face it, it leans pretty hard politically the other way. It's the land of McCarthy. It's the land of Mondale. It's the land of Humphrey. It's the land of Wellstone. It's the land of Jesse Ventura. And now it's the land of United States Senator Al Franken. I share that with you because, as Frank Sinatra would sing about New York, if we can make Minnesota conservative, we can do it anywhere. So welcome now to the new conservative Minnesota. Now, I shouldn't admit this, but some years ago when my daughters Anna and Mara were much younger, Mary and I took them over to the Wisconsin Dells. I should admit it because as a Minnesota public official, you know, we got a vacation in Minnesota. But the Wisconsin Dells are like the Wisconsin Riviera. They got these great water slides and water parks. And it was early August. A heat wave had rolled through the upper Midwest, and we were driving from the Wisconsin Dells back to Minneapolis in my little Dodge Stratus, Mary and me in the front seat, the girls in the back. And of course, those of you who've been on long car rides know how this goes with young kids. So about an hour into the trip, they're bored. They're throwing juice boxes at each other and pulling each other's hair and elbowing each other in the ribs and all that. And pretty soon the tempers in the car were matching the temperatures outside. So we pull into a gas station and I'm pumping gas into my car. I got the doors open to get some air in the car and I'm grinding my teeth, murmuring about these misbehaving kids and how awful their behavior is on that day. And this guy's pumping gas right next to me and he's kind of looking over at me and looking over at the car. He kind of senses there's some tension in my family. And he looks at me and our eyes kind of meet at the gas pump. And he says, "Oh, I wish I had 2 kids." And I thought, Pawlenty, you jerk. I mean, here you have these cherubs, these gifts from God, and this poor sap, he doesn't have any of that. And I said, "Well, I'm sorry, sir, you don't have kids?" And he says, "No, I got 5 kids. I wish I had 2 kids." Now, it's just a little story about putting things in context, and I want to share with you in the brief time I have this afternoon the importance of putting things in context as we discuss Americans for Prosperity, as we discuss this great nation and what we need to do to get it restored and back on track. We live in the freest and most prosperous nation in the history of the world. There are no people anywhere ever that have it as good or better than we have in the United States in these modern times. So as we chart our course forward, it's important for us to step back for a minute and just reflect those things that made this nation great. We're not the greatest nation in the world because we're the biggest demographically. We're not. We're not the greatest nation in the world because we're the cheapest, although we got to be more competitive. We're not the cheapest. We're the greatest nation in the world because we're the freest. And when people are free, they have the ability to dream their version of the American dream. They have their ability to associate with whoever they'd like in freedom. They have the ability to worship as they see fit. They have the ability to invent, to innovate, to take risks, to say, I can build something, I can do it better, I can do it faster, I can do it first, I can help. But when government comes into our lives, as they often do, and discourages that freedom, things change. Now, people sometimes say, look, our freedoms are mostly challenged by some external force, and that can certainly happen, and we should be vigilant about that. But just as often, in fact, more often, at some local unit of government, state or federal level of government, government crowds into our lives and takes over one more increment of space that previously was reserved for families, or previously was reserved for community or neighborhoods, or was previously reserved for entrepreneurs and free markets and the people who get involved in the competitive aspect of business, or they push out areas of philanthropy or charity or individual acts that were previously not suffocated by the government. But when they push into our lives to this degree, and it happens so incrementally, sometimes we don't even notice, they not only run their budgets up through the roof, they not only expand their footprint, but they do something else that is equally corrosive to our country. they weigh down and they discourage the American spirit. And that is what is causing us this great anxiety in the country. And we lose that, we're going to lose our country. We have within us the greatness of America. Our greatness as a country doesn't come from our government, it comes from our people. And our people have had this extraordinary can-do spirit. I can do it, I can help, I can do acts of generosity and kindness and love. I can start something, I can grow something, I can create something, I can deploy capital, take risks, build something, provide jobs. That kind of American spirit is unique. We shouldn't take it for granted. It's not some throwaway line by a politician to talk about freedom. It's what separates us from most other cultures throughout most of the rest of the world, throughout most of time. And we're allowing the government to slowly suffocate it. And for those of us in this room and rooms like it all across this country, it's past the hour to stand up and fight back. So that's what Mary and I are doing with our lives and all our time these days, and I'm glad you're here as well. And I want to talk to you just about two things. One is getting our financial house in order, and one is getting prosperity restored in this nation. I know there are many other issues, but these things are right in front of us, and they're paramount in these times. As we gather here this afternoon, know that our United States federal government spends $40,000 a second it doesn't have. In an hour, that's $144 million that they don't have. Every hour, every day, 7 days a week, every month. $144 million an hour that they don't have. They take in about $2.2 trillion a year in revenue, and they spend $3.7 trillion. It is out of control. You can't have a country that is spending 40 cents of every dollar in debt, and you know what's coming. It's the biggest slow motion crash in the history of American finance. You can see it coming. You can see it unfolding in slow motion. So what do we do about that? Number one, we got to have people who we send to Washington, D.C. and state capitals and local units of government who have the strength and the fortitude and conviction to draw lines in the sand and stand behind it and say, no more, no more. So we have to go to places like Iowa and say there's no more sacred cows anymore. We're going to phase out the ethanol subsidies. We have to look the American people in the eye without scaring them, without freaking them out, but putting reasonable solutions on the table to real challenges. And that's why we got to go to places like Florida and tell seniors and young people what it's really going to take to fix Social Security. We have to go to Wall Street and tell the bankers and the financiers and the money changers they got to get their snout out of the government trough because it's in deep as anybody else's. We got to go to the public employee unions and say you can't be getting a better deal and paying benefits than the people who are paying the bill, the taxpayers. And more. None of that is easy, but I'm telling you, as the conservative governor of this state, one of the most liberal states in the country, we tackled all of this. I'll give you just a few examples. I set a record for vetoes, as was mentioned. I shut down government, first government shutdown in 150 years of my state history over tax and spending matters. And then I did something called executive unallotment in Minnesota. The governor, in times of debt and crisis, can take money out of the budget. I took more out in my 8 years using unallotment authority, my 8 years, than all the 142 years worth of governors combined previously. We had a transit strike here for 44 days, basically a month and a half, one of the longest transit strikes in the history of the country, in the 15th largest metropolitan area in the country. So we tackled public employee pension and benefit issues before it was cool and popular. This was some years ago. We had bus drivers in the state, as one example, who could work 15 years and then become eligible to have the government pay their health care for the rest of their life. It was financially upside down. So I said, we're not doing that anymore. I went around the state and said, how many of you in the room, if you're not working for government, please raise your hand and tell me if you get to work just 15 years and then have somebody pay for your health insurance for the rest of your life. No hands ever went up. Do you know the bus drivers get that? They do, Governor? Do you know you're paying for that? We are, Governor? Do you think we should shut that off? Hell yeah, Governor.